A minimalist stick-figure ant standing beside a giant smartphone displaying simple notification dots, looking curiously at floating human thought bubbles drifting away, solid white circular head, wearing a white baseball cap backwards, simple 2D hand-drawn black lines with smooth edges, white background, high contrast, subtle white glow around the figure and objects, expressive body language, clean minimalist motion graphics aesthetic, symbolic visual metaphor, subtle blue accent, no text. Let's start from the beginning, because before understanding why you can't stop thinking, you need to understand what exactly is happening when your mind goes away without warning. Neuroscientists call it spontaneous thought, or mind wandering, any mental content that arises without being summoned by a specific task. You're washing dishes and suddenly you're reliving an embarrassing conversation from 3 years ago. You're in a meeting and suddenly you're mentally planning what you're going to eat for dinner. You're trying to fall asleep and your mind starts simulating an argument that may never happen with a specific person, complete with full arguments, counterarguments, and imaginary facial expressions. Nobody asked you to think about this. It just happened on its own. What neuroimaging research revealed about this process overturned the way scientists see the brain. For decades, the dominant model assumed that the brain at rest, with no specific task, simply went quiet. What functional MRI experiments showed was the opposite. There's an entire network of brain regions that gets more active precisely when you're not focused on anything external. This network, called the default mode network, is now considered one of the most important in the human brain, not despite being activated by the absence of tasks, but because of it. It's the self-referential network. It's the network that allows you to think about yourself, about other people, about the past, and about futures that don't yet exist. It's the network that makes empathy possible, long-term planning, creativity, internal narrative. And it doesn't switch off when you stop working. It switches on harder. This is why you can't simply stop thinking when you want to. It's not lack of discipline. It's that the system responsible for spontaneous thought doesn't have a visible off switch. It operates semi-autonomously, producing mental content even when, especially when, you didn't ask for it. The ant has nothing resembling this. An ant's nervous system is extraordinarily efficient, but built around a completely different principle: stimulus response. There's an external trigger, pheromone, temperature, physical contact, light, and there's a behavioral response. There is, as far as neuroscience can observe, no mechanism that produces mental content in the absence of stimulation. When there's no pheromone trail to follow, there's no imaginary assembly of ghost ants to be mentally simulated. When there's no present threat, there's no mental simulation of future threats. The system processes what is here, now, and stops. The constant presence the ant maintains isn't a virtue. It's the only structural option available to her. But here's where the part most people don't expect begins. The first twist in this story isn't that mind wandering is bad and that the ant has it right. It's that mind wandering, the very same process that makes you relive embarrassing conversations at 3 in the morning, is also the foundation of some of the most valuable cognitive capacities that exist in any known species. The same researchers who mapped how much the human mind wanders identified something that fell out of the headlines but is equally important. Mind wandering is associated with creativity, long-term planning, solving problems that require insight, and, most surprisingly, a specific type of empathy that requires imagining the perspective of someone who is not present. You can care about a person on the other side of the world, whom you'll never meet, who is suffering in a way that doesn't directly affect you, because your mind can generate a simulation of that suffering even without any present stimulus to represent it. This is what makes solidarity across distance possible, anticipation of long-term consequences, and the construction of projects that take decades to materialize. The wandering mind is not only a source of unhappiness. It is the same machinery that allows people to write novels, plan cathedrals to be completed by grandchildren not yet born, and imagine worlds that don't exist in order to then work toward creating them. An ant can't do any of this. She is extraordinarily efficient within the set of problems she was built for. But that set has a very clear limit. It only includes what can be perceived now, responded to now, resolved now. Any problem that requires imagining a future state with no present representation in the environment, a threat that might come tomorrow, an opportunity that will exist a week from now, is outside the reach of her system. So what looks, at first glance, like a human flaw, not being able to stop thinking, is actually the same system that gave us all the capacities no other animal develops to the same extent. The cost of this machinery is real. The unhappiness associated with mind wandering is real, documented in 250,000 real data points. But the right question isn't, how do I switch this off? It's, am I using this in a way that generates value, or is it running in the background without producing anything useful? And this is where the second twist comes in, and it's the most practical one of all. Researchers studying mind wandering found an important distinction that rarely makes it into news coverage. There's a difference between deliberate mind wandering and unintentional mind wandering. The first is when you voluntarily let the mind explore, purposeful daydreaming, approaching a problem in a non-linear way, letting free associations surface. The second is when the mind goes away against your will while you're trying to do something else. And the data separating these two types is significant. Unintentional mind wandering, especially when the person notices the mind has wandered and didn't want it to, is associated with higher levels of negative emotion than deliberate mind wandering. In other words, it's not thinking about other things that produces unhappiness. It's thinking about other things when you didn't choose to and are trying not to. That completely changes what stopping thinking actually means in practice. It's not about eliminating spontaneous thought. That would be impossible, and likely counterproductive, given what we know about its relationship with creativity and planning. It's about creating conditions where the mind has designated spaces to wander deliberately, and moments of focus where it can, with some practice, stay in the present for longer stretches. Contemplative traditions already knew this practically, long before neuroscience had the vocabulary to describe it. And what's interesting is that the most studied meditation practices, especially those based on mindfulness, don't attempt to eliminate thought. They teach the practitioner to notice when the mind has wandered without engaging with the content of that thought. It's a subtle distinction, but research shows it's functionally very different from active thought suppression, which typically produces the opposite effect. The more you try not to think about something, the more it appears. What psychologists call the white bear effect, originally described by Daniel Wegner in the 1980s. Tell someone not to think of a white bear, and that's exactly what they'll think about. The ant doesn't have this problem. But she doesn't have the solution either, because she never had the problem in the first place. What she has is a processing system that responds to the present with remarkable efficiency, without the weight and without the benefits of an apparatus capable of simulating worlds that don't yet exist. And perhaps that's exactly the final distinction that matters in this comparison. The ant and the human being solve completely different categories of problems. The ant solves brilliantly the problems that can be resolved by immediate reaction to present stimuli. The human being solves, in a messier, emotionally costlier, slower way, the problems that only exist in the future, the past, or the imagination. Neither system is superior in the abstract. Each one is extraordinary precisely within the domain it was shaped for. The question worth carrying after this video isn't how to be more like an ant, present, efficient, without spontaneous thought. It's a more honest one than that. Of all the time your mind spends wandering outside the present moment, how much of that time is being invested in something with real value, creativity, planning, empathy, imagining possible futures, and how much is simply looping, replaying the same content with no destination other than exhaustion? Because the answer to that question, more than any insight about ants or neuroscience, is what will determine whether the most sophisticated machinery evolution has ever produced is working in favor of the person carrying it, or simply making noise in the background.